Welcome to the Hindu Daily.
Today, we are dissecting 8 key sources, ranging from the architecture of health justice and systemic failures in air travel, to the surprising genomic history of the domestic cat, and a world-first social media ban in Australia.
Our mission is to filter this dense stack of information and give you the foundational insights you need to be immediately well-informed.
So let's jump right into the editorial section.
Yeah, let's start with a really powerful examination of dignity in mental health care.
The source material here is, well, it's extraordinary.
It is, isn't it? Because it just refuses to start with data. Instead, it foregrounds these deeply human stories that reveal systemic failure almost immediately.
Right. You're confronted with the reality of a 60-year-old who is just passively navigating life after a childhood spent, eating leftovers.
And that story of the trauma survivor who now defensively calls her suffering dust.
Or the horrifying memory of a person chained and forced to drink water from a washroom because their distress was labeled unmanageable.
These narratives are so crucial because they feed directly into the article's core argument.
That mental health care must be radically reimagined. It needs to completely abandon the current deficits lens, this approach that only focuses on what's supposedly wrong with an individual.
And the current model, it often assumes that the goal is just integration. But moving toward dignity, as this source suggests, requires us to ask a really basic question.
Integration into what?
Exactly.
The source notes that integration often just means adaptation to an unequal, unjust, and resource-deprived social order.
The very order that might have caused the distress in the first place.
Precisely. When a survivor views their trauma as just, it's often a necessary defense mechanism against a system that has repeatedly failed to acknowledge the validity of their pain.
So the main pursuit, then, must be dignity and disability justice. It's about restructuring society, not just trying to repair the individual.
And the scale of this problem, it just demands that kind of radical thinking. Globally, the access gaps for mental health care are massive.
We're talking between 70 and 90%, right?
70 to 90%. And if you try to connect psychological distress back to its roots, you can see the link to structural issues so clearly.
I mean, you can even see it in the NCRB data on the causes of suicide.
Yes, and while that data can be reductive, it still shows that 1/3 of suicides are due to family problems and 1/10 are from relational ruptures.
So when standard psychiatric care aims to fix an individual's maladaptive patterns, what's it really doing?
It's placing the responsibility and the blame squarely on them. It completely obscures the sustained material, relational, and structural deprivation that actually precipitated the crisis.
So comprehensive care has to look beyond just biology or psychology.
It absolutely must. It requires simultaneous attention to every concurrent explanation for distress: biological, psychological, social, cultural, political, and historical.
And how all of those factors powerfully intersect with caste, class, gender, and queer identities.
You can't treat biological symptoms effectively if the person is simultaneously enduring, say, extreme housing precarity or discrimination. It just doesn't work.
I found it so compelling that the piece concludes by asking this one question. What if the focus shifts entirely from treatment to?
What does this person need to live the life they want?
Yes, it recognizes there are many valid ways of responding to distress. And crucially, the system has to recognize and compensate non-specialists.
And those with lived experience, they need to be seen as practitioners who bring a community wisdom that, frankly, formal training simply cannot replicate.
That focus on dignity, it connects so neatly to the next source we're looking at.
It does. India's National Convention on Health Rights, which was organized by Jan Swasthya Abhiyan, or JSA.
It gathered about 400 professionals and activists in early December, and their overarching message is, well, it's completely unambiguous.
Healthcare for people, not for profits.
That message is central to their whole critique of privatization, isn't it?
Absolutely. They are pushing back hard against the expansion of public-private partnerships, which often involves handing public health facilities over to private entities.
And that threatens already weakened public services.
It does, and it makes essential healthcare unaffordable for crores of Indians. We're talking tens of millions of people.
And the regulatory failure has only made the problem worse. We've seen this commercial boon in private healthcare that hasn't been matched by necessary oversight.
Right. The Clinical Establishments Act, which was meant to standardize private care way back in 2010.
It's still only nominally implemented.
The consequences for patients are severe. You see frequent overcharging, opaque pricing, and a lot of unnecessary procedures.
The source specifically highlights the startling rate of unnecessary cesarean sections as just one example of this unchecked commercial incentive.
So a key goal for the convention is to advocate for rate standardization, transparent pricing, and, this is critical, mandatory observance of the Charter of Patients' Rights.
And if we look at the financial side of this, it's pretty stark. India's public health allocation is among the lowest globally.
It's only about 2% of the union budget. That equates to roughly $25 per capita in public spending each year.
So even with a focus on insurance schemes, out-of-pocket expenses remain cripplingly high for so many families.
And that's exactly why the convention's participants are exploring alternative financing frameworks. They believe the solution is in enhanced government spending, maybe through dedicated taxes.
Rather than just relying on the current insurance-based models.
Exactly. Those models often shift costs right back to the most vulnerable people just when they need care the most. They're also looking at a more holistic view of justice.
Like better wages and secure employment for health workers.
Yes, and addressing the fact that 80% of medicines remain outside of any price control. It's a systemic problem.
So we've seen how systemic failure can harm vulnerable citizens and health workers. Now let's look at how a different kind of systemic failure is crippling the transportation sector.
Specifically, the aviation chaos caused by IndiGo.
This crisis was triggered by, well, regulatory noncompliance.
That's right. IndiGo itself admitted to misjudgment and planning gaps in preparing for the new Phase 2 pilot rest and duty norms.
And those came into effect on November 1st. These rules required raising the weekly pilot rest period from 36 to 48 hours and capping night landings.
That immediately shrank their available flight hours pool, forcing a massive contraction in service.
Massive is the word. IndiGo had to drop from 2,300 daily flights down to about 1,800 or 1,900.
And because IndiGo holds over 60% of the market share, its operational failure affects the entire industry.
When the market leader abruptly pulls that much supply, it creates this huge vacuum.
A vacuum that rivals who are already dealing with their own constraints just cannot fill. This resulted in flight cancellations and immediate price hikes across the board.
The financial irony here is really the core insight. IndiGo needed to onboard about 900 new pilots to maintain its schedule.
And the estimated additional annual cost of hiring them, about 5,500 million rupees, would have been less than 8% of the airline's really impressive profit after tax from the previous year.
So they chose not to spend the money.
It's a textbook case of maximizing immediate profit margin over system resilience. The aviation safety advisor, Captain A. Ranganathan, confirmed this.
He said IndiGo applied for an increased winter schedule knowing they hadn't hired enough pilots.
Not only that, but delaying promotions for senior first officers and cutting their allowances directly led to a pilot exodus.
So the market leader chose short-term financial optimization over basic operational integrity. And we all felt the consequences.
From the unintended consequences of market failure, let's pivot to the unintended consequences of, well, species success.
The domestic cat.
Yeah.
A new paper in Science analyzed 87 ancient and modern cat genomes across 11,000 years.
It's trying to trace the feline muse right back to its roots.
And the ancestor is confirmed as the African wildcat Felis libica. But the genetic evidence delivers a major revision to our understanding of history.
A huge one. We've sort of always assumed the domestic cat migrated to Europe during the Neolithic period, around 9,500 years ago.
But this new genetic study pushes the arrival of the modern domestic cat in Europe much, much later.
To only about 2,000 years ago.
That radically shifts the timeline. If the cat was domesticated thousands of years ago in West Asia, why the huge delay in spreading across the Mediterranean?
Well, the researchers hypothesized that the translocation was tied not just to reverence, but to pure utility.
So the great dispersal mechanism wasn't necessarily Neolithic farmers.
No, it was maritime trade. Cats were extremely useful as pest controllers on ships, and this is linked directly to the massive shipping routes of Carthage and the Roman Empire.
Which relied heavily on grain supplies imported from Egypt. That makes perfect sense. The cat was a tool of commerce.
Exactly. Yet this genomic timeline still sort of bets up against the archaeological and iconographic record.
Right, because we know that by the time of Egypt's Thutmose III, that's 3,500 years ago, cats were revered household pets associated with the goddess Bastet.
It just highlights the difficulty of correlating these two lines of evidence. Archaeology tells us where the cat was revered, but genomics tells us when their specific domestic lineage actually spread.
And I imagine getting a clean genetic signature from an ancient mummy is difficult.
Extremely difficult. What's clear, though, is that the cat's ultimate success story is massive. We're talking approaching 1 billion individuals globally.
Which brings us to the unintended consequence of that very success. The once revered pet is now, environmentally speaking, a menace.
A menace that markedly impacts biodiversity. The source quotes a 2023 paper documenting that cats are known to prey on over 2,000 species.
2,084 species, to be exact, including 347 species of conservation concern.
The same traits that made them so useful on Roman grain ships now make them highly effective, generalized predators across modern ecosystems.
This theme of unintended consequences connects directly to our next section, doesn't it?
It does. We can use the two recent transport disruptions, the crisis of overcrowded by hardbound trains and the IndiGo flight cancellations, as a sharp lens to analyze the constraints imposed by the dominant economic model.
Okay, so let's try to anchor these academic terms to reality. First, the railways represented a demand shock.
Right. You have low fixed prices for an essential government service, combined with soaring demand, in this case migrants traveling for festivals.
And the result of that fixed, low pricing is massive overcrowding and dangerous conditions.
Traditional economics would argue that efficiency requires raising prices to meet equilibrium, but the article rejects this completely.
It argues that for essential services, the answer is not restricting access for the poor through higher prices.
But significant government investment to increase supply and capacity.
Which is where the imposed governmental budget ceiling comes in. Political decisions to prioritize fiscal restraint over infrastructure spending, what the source calls the neoliberal constraint, limit the government's ability to make that necessary investment.
Precisely. To overcome this, the source suggests taxing the wealthy, a modest wealth and income tax on the top 1%, to fund and strengthen the welfare state.
But this kind of redistribution is resisted by both domestic and global capital.
Which keeps that investment constraint firmly in place.
And then on the other side, you have the IndiGo supply shock, which is the result of deregulation. A massive amount of supply was withdrawn because of the airline's regulatory failure.
But its near-monopoly status allowed it to dictate the market. This led to massive, system-wide price increases for consumers who were just trying to find an alternative flight.
In a genuinely competitive market, one firm's supply restriction wouldn't cause such a market-wide disruption.
But when capital concentrates and monopolies arise, consumer welfare declines catastrophically and prices spike.
The synthesis is so powerful. These two negative outcomes, overcrowding on trains because the state is constrained from investing, and massive flight price hikes because private monopolies are left unchecked. They're linked.
They both stem from an economic model that restricts state action in essential welfare services while simultaneously promoting deregulation and capital concentration in private industries.
Moving from economic constraints to technological challenges, let's turn to Google's Quantum Echoes experiment.
Right, using their 65-qubit Willow processor. This sounds technically immense.
It does. What exactly did they achieve here?
Well, it's important to state that this was a purely scientific achievement. It's distinct from solving a real-world problem, unlike those earlier quantum supremacy claims that focused on raw speed.
This was different.
This experiment was about understanding the fundamental physics of quantum entanglement. They measured something called out-of-time order correlators, or OTOCs.
And what are OTOCs? In simple terms.
Think of it as studying how quickly chaos spreads in a system. They essentially gave the entangled system a microscopic poke, then reverse time, and listen for the echo to study how information was scrambled.
So it's an intellectual test, not a direct step closer to building a code-breaking machine.
Exactly. So if this experiment isn't a threat, then what is Q-Day? We hear that term a lot.
Q-Day is the point where a cryptographically relevant quantum computer is powerful enough to break public key encryption, like RSA 2048.
And the current real risk isn't an immediate hack. It's harvest now, decrypt later.
So intercepted encrypted data today, knowing a quantum computer can break it in the future.
That's the threat.
So what's the size of the gap we need to bridge before that actually happens?
A huge gap. Factoring RSA 2048 requires millions of logical qubits. That means error-corrected qubits. Current processors only have a few hundred noisy ones.
So experts estimate we're still 5 to 8 years away from the creation of truly capable machines.
That gives us a window to prepare.
And what are the standardized countermeasures?
The necessary countermeasure is called post-quantum cryptography, or PQC. The U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology NIST has already standardized new algorithms.
Crystals, kyber, and dilithium.
That's right. They rely on math problems, like lattice problems, that are resistant to both classical computers and anticipated quantum attacks. So the solution is already in development.
Okay, let's shift back to essential resources. Poor water access is a massive global issue. Only about 14% reliable access in rural areas of low-income countries.
And we're looking at a study conducted in Odisha, a state that ranks quite low in piped water coverage.
This research is so compelling because it addressed a long-standing research gap.
It really did. Previous studies estimated the value of water indirectly. They'd observed things like the time people spent collecting it or the low adoption rate of filters.
But this study completely removed those non-monetary burdens. The collection time, the taste aversion, the labor.
By delivering clean water directly to homes.
So by eliminating the inconvenience, they could measure the true valuation. That's clever methodology.
It is. They ran 3 arms. The price arm measured how people responded to buying subsidized water. The free water arm provided an unconstrained demand benchmark.
But the most rigorous one was the exchangeable entitlement arm.
That was the key. They gave households an entitlement they could redeem either for subsidized clean water or for an equivalent amount of cash.
And their reluctance to take the cash revealed their true valuation of the water service.
So what did that robust methodology reveal?
The findings were startling. Both willingness to pay and willingness to accept were substantially higher than prior indirect estimates.
This demonstrates that earlier work severely underestimated the true value of potable water because it mistakenly attributed low valuation to the water itself.
Rather than the effort required to get it.
And the willingness to accept finding was particularly strong, right? They were very reluctant to forego the clean water even for cash.
The WTA was strikingly high. It powerfully reinforces that clean water isn't viewed as a luxury. It's an absolute necessity.
So the key insight here for you, the listener, is that low uptake of filters or chlorine in the past wasn't due to a lack of concern for purity.
It was an aversion to the associated inconveniences, the bad taste, the labor, the time.
When safe water is made reliable and easy to access, people value it deeply.
And this research strongly supports policy changes. It backs government strategies that focus on subsidized, decentralized home delivery models.
As effective interim solutions until massive infrastructure projects can be completed, it reframes water access as an issue of service dignity.
Moving from the fundamental right to water, we end today's dive considering a modern digital right.
Australia has enacted a world-first law banning anyone under 16 from major social media platforms like Meta, TikTok, and X.
And platforms are facing very high fines for non-compliance.
This is a massive regulatory experiment trying to balance government protection against digital autonomy.
And you see the human side of it. Consider the case of 15-year-old Riley Allen living on an outback ranch. He's worried this ban will sever communication with his friends who live 70 kilometers away during the holidays.
And his mother recognizes that other parents will likely just help their kids bypass the rule using fake identities.
The issue is already being contested legally, of course. 2 15-year-old plaintiffs are challenging the law in the High Court.
They're arguing it improperly robs 2.6 million young Australians of the implied right to freedom of political communication, a right they argue is essential for modern civic participation.
The government and supporting groups, like the Heaps Up Alliance, they're defending the ban. They argue it's necessary to address mounting health harms.
Their theory is that social media is too blunt an instrument for the young mind, and that when everybody misses out, nobody misses out.
But the academics and the teenagers themselves argue the ban is totally counterproductive. Over 140 academics opposed it.
And teenagers state it will silence their important voices and, critically, force them onto more dangerous, less regulated options.
Or cause them to use VPNs.
Which then removes parental supervision entirely, achieving the exact opposite of the intended protection.
That's the critical tension, isn't it? Does the attempt to police age simply push the activity into a completely unsupervised and unaccountable dark space?
It's a complex trade-off between protecting health and teaching digital literacy and freedom within regulated bounds.
Our deep dive today has consistently shown that systems designed primarily for market efficiency or fiscal restraint inevitably fail in managing essential human welfare.
Whether it's maximizing profit over pilot resilience, constraining the railway budget leading to hazardous conditions, or failing to realize that human dignity and mental health with clean water is a primary value.
The vulnerability of the citizen increases when systemic constraints are prioritized over human needs.
Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description.
As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.